I am Andrew GYORGY of Boston University, a political scientist, a native of Hungary. For the past 25 years, it's been my profession to follow political developments in Eastern Europe with the greatest care. The film you are about to see gives you an idea of the truly momentous changes which have been occurring in the economic and political landscape of Eastern Europe. Let me make a few observations first. Would you mind? Hungary for years has been a Soviet satellite. Now today the term satellite appears to be obsolete, and the country, although until recently it seemed to be caught in a web of Russification, that is doing things the Russian way, now is moving rapidly towards a more Hungarian national way of life. Actually, the possibility that Hungary may break completely away from Soviet political control now appears as a fairly realistic prospect. Immense changes have been taking place in that country. What are some of the reasons for these changes? Well, first of all, we have the sense of political nationalism, a sense of Hungarians belonging together. Then there is the factor of national resignation. That is an ability to ignore and thus lessen the impact of an unfortunate or difficult situation. Hungarians keep saying, we have seen all this happen before, and this gives them a sense of sharing and therefore of lessening the impact of and the onslaught of communism. A third secret weapon of Hungary is its relative economic prosperity. Despite the few years since their recent rebellion, today economic conditions have improved to the point where they are probably the best in Eastern Europe, except possibly for Poland. We now have a tremendous sense of political and economic self-assertion in that country, which is actually tremendously loosening the bonds between the Soviet Union and the Hungarian nation. This does not mean, however, that Hungary will drop communism in the foreseeable future, but rather that it will move towards a more Hungarian type of national communism. The film we are about to see tries to give you a balanced picture, as it is seen through the eyes of a professor of law, a good friend of mine, whom I value greatly, Professor Joseph Réti.
Miért ülsz így magadba, papa? Miért nem jössz velünk egy kicsit játszani?
Elmerengtem itt ebbe a gyönyörű városba, úgy megszépült ide nekünk.
Gyere egy kicsit, hát nem ülsz itt egyedül.
Na jó van, megyek.
I am József Réti, a Hungarian, a Magyar, for nearly 40 years a professor of law. These are my grandchildren, Maria and Béla, my daughter Teresa and her husband George. We are of different worlds, George, Teresa, and I. Their generation has lived under 2 decades of communism. I remember different times. A Hungary that was free, a Budapest that was once one of Europe's brightest, gayest capitals, though this land has known but little peace in its long and tortured history. In March 1944, German armies entered Hungary, supposedly as allies, but they behaved as outright conquerors. The goose step echoed across Eastern Europe, and Adolf Hitler became its master. Then in late 1944, the Russians pushed in from the east. After the dreadful Battle of Budapest, the Nazi troops were driven out. The Red Army posed as Hungary's liberator. But history seems bound to repeat itself, and a new tyranny replaced the old. Communism gradually penetrated every aspect of life in Hungary. Supported by the might of the Red Army, the Hungarian communist leaders who had spent the war years in Moscow now returned, and a puppet communist government was established. The Red Army stayed. Hungary became a satellite of the Soviet Union. In a strangely silent and empty Budapest, an awful fear and tension hung in the air. Criticism of any kind could mean death. After 11 years of ruthless domination by Stalin's Hungarian disciples, opposition broke out in open rebellion in October 1956, led by factory workers, students, and intellectuals. I was among them. It was brief, bloody, and violent. For a moment, there were hopes that Hungary could become neutral, like Austria. The people begged for help from the West, but instead, the Russian army was called in by Hungary's own communist leaders, and the Reds cruelly smashed the revolt. Over 200,000 people fled Hungary rather than live under communism. In November 1956, it seemed that all was lost. But now, it slowly appears that perhaps the revolution was not in vain. In time, I was released from prison and returned to my home. But I will write no more of revolution, for we have seen this cannot be as long as we remain under the guns of the Red Army. Much has changed in Hungary since those dark days of '56. We are no longer governed by a rule of terror. Considerable relaxation has resulted from shifts in the policy of the Communist Party. Within limits, even politics can now be discussed in public. Western influence is everywhere. The young copy and admire everything that is Western. Shop windows display Western luxury goods at reasonable prices. Theaters now show recent American films and fewer East European and Soviet products. The grey and empty look is slowly fading from the streets of Budapest. Traffic has become a problem as more and more people are able to buy cars. New cars are imported, mainly from East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and the Soviet Union. While most Hungarian exports still go to the socialist bloc countries, trade with the West is steadily increasing. About 40% of all industrial exports now go to the countries of the free world. Now it is possible to leave Hungary to go abroad. Many do, and most come back. The ugly barbed wire and minefields still exist along the borders. And yet, more and more Hungarians by the thousands are allowed to visit the West as private tourists. Expanding recreational facilities also reflect the regime's effort to relax the austere communist way of life, and in so doing capture the support of the people. Housing in the grim old buildings is poor and scarce. The amount of space an individual may occupy is sharply limited by the state. There is much crowding and great dissatisfaction. New construction cannot begin to keep up with demand, and housing problems only seem to grow. One of the characteristics of communism in Hungary has been the rapid forced development of industry. The effort requires woman power as well as manpower. We are constantly told that all must work at whatever task assigned, that it is our patriotic duty. Work in itself has become a kind of god. My son-in-law is an engineer in a factory manufacturing telephone equipment. He is a dedicated communist who has been taught from early youth to believe that communism promises much for Hungary. In communist Eastern Europe, both husband and wife must work, since the economy is so organized that it requires the income of both to keep a family. My daughter is an inspector in a textile mill. By Western standards, the workers are poorly paid. Low wages are offset to some extent, however, by cheap rents and food, free education and medical care. My daughter does the marketing for the family on her way home from work. Although there are shortages of some commodities from time to time, there is an adequate supply of food and more variety than we have seen in many years. Even such luxury items as frozen foods are being introduced. Almost all business and industry is owned and managed by the Communist Party and the state's giant bureaucracy, which regulates every phase of its people's existence. Only a few small private enterprises are permitted to survive. A hairdresser may have his own shop if he does not employ more than 3 or 4 people. A tailor may sell his work privately. A flower stall may be independent, but all larger enterprises are directly controlled by the party and the state. Churches are supervised by the Ministry of Education. People, on the whole, are free to attend any church. The regime, for the time at least, has discontinued the religious persecutions of the past. Though I was imprisoned for my opposition to the regime, I'm now back at my old position in the university, teaching law. The forgiving of political sins of the past seems also part of the new techniques. For me and for my family, life has become easier since the revolution of '56. While we are not content, neither are we altogether unhappy. Budapest has a long tradition of culture, and the tempo of cultural activity has increased with operas, plays, films, and concerts available at low cost. People who have never before seen a theatrical performance now can enjoy such things. Touring companies travel through the countryside, bringing entertainment to the villages. Instead of repression and terror, these are the current techniques by which the regime seeks to gain popular support. The Danube flows through a land which, for the time at least, is at peace. Under communism, 84% of the land has been collectivized, taken from private owners and formed into large farming units, into collective and state farms. With modern machinery and methods, it was hoped that agricultural production could be increased, but the results have been disappointing, and the harvests are smaller today than they were before World War II. Hungary has even had to purchase grain from America. While there have been vast changes in agriculture, there is also much that has not changed. Life for the peasant is still simple and hard. Under communism, they have lost the right to own their land and home, their freedom to live and work as they choose. The regime, on the other hand, points out that they have gained such things as hospitals, medical care, and schools, where there were none before. It is true that illiteracy among the young is fast becoming a thing of the past. The symbols of Soviet domination, which once were everywhere, are now seldom to be seen. Hungarians are no longer constantly confronted and infuriated by evidence of the Soviet presence. But whether the Red Army trams the street of Budapest or not, we are still, to be sure, dominated by the Soviet Union. The techniques of the dictatorship, however, have changed. A lightening of governmental pressures has contributed to economic improvement, and rapid industrialization has created a desire for a better life and greater freedom. For the time being, there is a policy of relaxation, which we desperately hope will continue. What lies ahead, I would not dare to predict. For we, the people of Hungary, have yet to achieve a voice in our own destiny.